Once upon a time, in a small village nestled between rolling hills and lush green forests, there lived a kind-hearted girl named Cinderella. Her real name had been Ella, but over the years, people started calling her Cinderella because she was always covered in ashes and cinders from cleaning the fireplace. Cinderella lived with her stepmother, Lady Drusilla, and her two stepsisters, Narcissa and Drusilla. Her stepmother had once promised to care for her like her own daughter after Cinderella's father passed away. However, Lady Drusilla's heart was as cold as the winter winds, and she saw Cinderella as nothing more than a servant in her own home. Every morning, long before the sun rose, Cinderella would wake up and begin her chores. She swept the floors, scrubbed the windows, and tended to the chickens and goats. The stepmother and stepsisters would give her endless tasks while they lounged in their fine clothes, admiring themselves in ornate mirrors. Despite her hard life, Cinderella remained gentle and hopeful. She found comfort in the birds that nested near her window and the little mice that scurried through the house. To her, they were not pests but friends who listened to her songs and stories. One bright morning, as Cinderella was gathering firewood, she noticed a tiny robin struggling to untangle itself from a thorny bush. Without hesitation, she rushed to help the little bird. "Dear, you're free now?" she whispered softly as the bird chirped in gratitude. The robin flew up and hovered near her face as if to say thank you, then darted away into the forest. Cinderella smiled and felt a warmth in her heart that made her forget her troubles, even if just for a moment. Lady Drusilla had a grand plan that day. She had received an invitation to a royal ball at the palace. The king, eager to find a bride for his son, the handsome Prince Edward, had invited all eligible maidens in the kingdom to attend. The ball would be an opportunity for the prince to choose his future queen. When Lady Drusilla read the invitation aloud at breakfast, Narcissa and Drusilla shrieked with delight. "A ball! A real ball! Imagine all the handsome lords and elegant ladies," Narcissa exclaimed, twirling in excitement. "And the prince?" Drusilla added. "He will surely choose me once he sees how beautiful I am." But Lady Drusilla nodded approvingly at her daughters. "Yes, my dears, we must prepare at once. We will need new gowns, the finest jewelry, and hairdressers from the city." Cinderella, standing in the corner with her broom, felt a flicker of hope. "May I go to the ball too?" she asked timidly. The room fell silent. Then Lady Drusilla and her daughters burst into laughter. "You at the ball?" Narcissa sneered. With those rags and ashes?" Drusilla added, jiggling. Lady Drusilla's eyes narrowed. "If you finish all your chores and find something suitable to wear, you may go. But remember, you are not to embarrass this family with your presence." A Cinderella's heart soared at the possibility, even though she knew the odds were against her. Days passed, and the house buzzed with preparations for the ball. Lady Drusilla and her daughters spent hours being fitted for gowns, trying on jewels, and discussing hairstyles. Meanwhile, Cinderella worked tirelessly, sewing their dresses, polishing their shoes, and ironing their ribbons. On the morning of the ball, Cinderella approached her stepmother cautiously. "Stepmother, I have finished all the chores. May I please attend the ball?" Lady Drusilla glanced at her with a cold smile. "Of course, dear, if you have something to wear." Cinderella rushed to her tiny attic room and pulled out a gown that had once belonged to her mother. Though it was old, it was still beautiful. With delicate lace and soft, flowing fabric, she carefully mended the small tears and added a ribbon from her sewing basket. When she came downstairs wearing the gown, her stepsisters gasped in horror. "You can't wear that," Narcissa shouted. "It looks better than ours," Drusilla wailed. Lady Drusilla stepped forward and ripped the gown at the seams. "This will not do," she said coldly. "Stay home where you belong." Cinderella felt tears welling up, but she refused to cry in front of them. She watched as her stepmother and stepsisters climbed into their carriage, laughing and chattering about the ball, and disappeared down the road. Alone in the silent house, Cinderella sank to the floor, her heart heavy with sadness. As night fell, the house grew darker and quieter. Cinderella sat by the fireplace, staring at the glowing embers. Suddenly, a soft, warm light filled the room. She looked up to see a kind-looking woman with silver hair and a flowing gown standing before her. "Who are you?" Cinderella asked in awe. "I am your fairy godmother," the woman said with a gentle smile. "And I have come to help you." Cinderella blinked in disbelief. "Help me? How?" The fairy godmother waved her wand, and the room sparkled with magic. The torn gown on the floor transformed into a magnificent ball gown, shimmering like moonlight. A pair of glass slippers appeared on Cinderella's feet, and her hair was styled into elegant curls. "But how will I get to the ball?" Cinderella asked, still in shock. The fairy godmother pointed to the pumpkin in the corner of the room. With a flick of her wand, the pumpkin turned into a golden carriage, and 4 mice scampered into white horses. "Remember," the fairy godmother said, "the magic will only last until the clock strikes midnight. After that, everything will return to how it was." Cinderella nodded, her heart racing with excitement. She climbed into the carriage and set off for the palace, her dreams finally within reach. The golden carriage glided smoothly over the cobblestones, carrying Cinderella toward the grand palace that shimmered in the moonlight. She sat inside, the shimmering gown swishing gently with each movement. Her heart raced with excitement and wonder as she thought of all the possibilities that awaited her at the ball. As the carriage approached the palace gates, they were opened by guards in shimmering silver armor. The sight of the majestic palace took Cinderella's breath away. She had only heard of such beauty in stories, but now she was walking through its grand halls, her dreams unfolding before her eyes. Inside, the ballroom was even more enchanting than she had imagined. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting a soft, magical glow. The air was filled with the sweet sound of violins and laughter from elegantly dressed guests. Cinderella paused at the entrance, her heart pounding. She glanced down at her glass slippers and the shimmering gown, feeling a mixture of excitement and fear. What if someone discovered who she truly was? A gentle voice spoke beside her. "You look beautiful," said a young man in a silver tunic, his eyes sparkling like starlight. It was Prince Edward, the heir to the throne. He had been walking through the room, greeting his guests when he spotted her. Cinderella felt her cheeks flush with warmth. "Thank you," she said softly. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Prince Edward led her onto the dance floor, and they swayed together in perfect harmony. The world around them faded away, leaving just the music, the twinkling lights, and their laughter. "You have the most enchanting smile," Prince Edward whispered, his voice as smooth as silk. Cinderella felt her heart soar. "So do you?" she replied, smiling back. Hours passed, and the ball continued in full splendor. Cinderella danced with other lords and ladies, each more charming than the last. But it was Prince Edward who seemed to fill her thoughts, his gentle touch lingering in her memory. The clock above the grand entrance began to chime. It was nearing midnight. Cinderella's breath hitched as the realization dawned on her. She had to leave before the magic wore off. "I must go," she said quickly, her voice trembling with urgency. Prince Edward's face fell slightly, his brows furrowing in concern. "At least tell me your name," he pleaded softly. Cinderella hesitated for a moment, then gently slipped away from his grasp. "I can't," she said quietly, her voice barely audible over the music. "But you'll find me, I promise." "Ah." Without another word, she rushed through the palace halls, the glass slippers clicking against the marble floors. She passed through the grand entrance just as the final chime of the clock echoed through the air. The golden carriage awaited her. But as she climbed in, her gown began to shimmer, transforming back into the simple dress she had worn earlier. Back home, Cinderella sat by the fireplace once again. The magic had faded, and she was left with only memories of the enchanted night. Her heart ached for the prince and the life they could have shared. She held the glass slippers tightly in her hands, a keepsake from a night she would never forget. The next day, Lady Drusilla and her daughters returned from the ball, gossiping about the mysterious princess. They marveled at the lavish gowns and jewels they had seen, but none could forget the radiant girl who had danced with the prince. "I will find her," Prince Edward declared, his heart heavy with longing. "No matter where she comes from, I will search the kingdom to find the girl who stole my heart." The Cinderella smiled softly to herself, her dreams of a life filled with love and magic still alive. And as days passed, she knew that true love's magic could never truly fade. Days turned into weeks, and the kingdom buzzed with whispers of the mysterious princess who had danced with Prince Edward at the royal ball. Every corner of the palace was searched, every invitation given, but no sign of the enchanting girl could be found. Prince Edward's heart yearned for answers, and the search consumed his every thought. Back in her small, cozy home, Cinderella spent her days quietly, often lost in her own dreams. Her stepsisters continued their petty rivalry, and Lady Drusilla's cruelty knew no bounds. But through it all, Cinderella held on to the hope that somehow, someday, her dreams of a better life would come true. One morning, as Cinderella sat by the window, she spotted a familiar figure riding through the village streets. It was the royal herald, his horse adorned with banners bearing the emblem of the royal family. He was calling out to the townsfolk, announcing a grand search for the mysterious princess who had danced with the prince. Curiosity stirred in Cinderella's chest. She listened carefully as the herald described the enchanting girl, her graceful demeanor, her radiant smile, and the glass slippers that had been left behind. "No matter where she comes from," the herald said, "the prince seeks her heart, and his search will lead him to every corner of the kingdom." Cinderella felt her breath catch in her throat. Could it be her? Was her dream about to come true? The herald continued his journey, spreading the news throughout the entire kingdom. From grand castles to humble cottages, all were invited to try on the glass slipper. It was said that whoever it fit would be the true bride of Prince Edward. Lady Drusilla and her daughters were the first to rush to the palace when the announcement spread. They pushed and shoved their way to the front, hoping the slipper would somehow fit their dainty feet. But despite their efforts, the slipper was far too small for either of them. Cinderella watched the spectacle from her place by the hearth. Her heart ached for the prince, hoping he would find the girl he sought. The glass slippers she still held onto seemed to grow heavier with each passing day. A soft knock at the door drew Cinderella's attention. She opened it to find an elderly woman, her face lined with wisdom. "Is this the home of Lady Cinderella?" the woman asked softly. "Yes," Cinderella replied, her voice cautious. "Who are you?" The woman smiled gently and handed Cinderella a small, worn velvet box, a gift from the royal family. "It seems the prince wishes to see you." Cinderella's hands trembled as she opened the box. Inside lay the glass slipper, the very one she had danced in at the ball. Tears filled her eyes as she knew her moment had arrived. "I'll guide you to the palace," the elderly woman said, offering her arm. "It's time." The journey to the palace was swift. Cinderella's heart pounded with excitement and fear. What if her dream was too good to be true? What if the prince no longer remembered her? When they arrived, the grand gates stood tall, adorned with flowers and banners. Guards opened them slowly, allowing Cinderella to step into the palace courtyard once more. The grand hall was filled with people once again. But this time, the prince stood waiting, his eyes scanning the crowd. Cinderella felt her breath catch as their eyes met. Prince Edward's gaze softened as he stepped forward, holding out the glass slipper. "It's you," he whispered, his voice shaking with emotion. "You're the one." She nodded, her heart overflowing with happiness. The glass slipper slipped onto her foot perfectly, fitting as though it was meant only for her. The crowd erupted in cheers, their voices blending into a joyous melody. Prince Edward took Cinderella's hand, leading her into the ballroom where the enchanted night had begun. The music played once more, and as they danced, nothing else in the world mattered. "I knew you'd find me," Cinderella said softly, her voice filled with love. "I couldn't imagine a world without you," Prince Edward replied, his heart full. Together, they embraced, their dreams now realized. The kingdom rejoiced, for true love had found its way. And so Cinderella and Prince Edward ruled the kingdom, spreading kindness and joy to all. Their story became the most beloved tale of all, a reminder that magic exists when hearts are pure and dreams are unwavering. The sun rose over the kingdom in a glow of gold and pink, marking the beginning of a new chapter for Cinderella and Prince Edward. The air buzzed with excitement as preparations for the royal wedding reached their peak. Townsfolk from far and wide flocked to witness the union of their beloved prince and the mysterious girl who had captured his heart. Cinderella sat in her chamber, her hands resting gently on her lap. The morning breeze stirred the delicate lace of her gown as she stared out the window, reflecting on her journey from rags to royalty. It still felt like a dream she never wanted to wake from. A gentle knock echoed on the door, pulling her from her thoughts. "Come in," she said softly. The door creaked open, revealing her fairy godmother, the kind woman who had guided her through moments of doubt and fear. "Ah, my dear Cinderella," the fairy godmother said with a warm smile. Are you ready for today?" Cinderella nodded, her eyes glistening with emotion. "More than ready," she whispered. "But it's also overwhelming. Love has a way of transforming even the most overwhelming moments into memories of joy," the fairy godmother replied wisely. "Now, let me help you prepare for your wedding." The royal courtyard was filled with guests, their chatter blending harmoniously with the sweet strains of music drifting through the air. The royal bannermen held banners of silk and gold, fluttering in the breeze as the ceremony drew closer. Prince Edward stood at the altar, his gaze fixed on the entrance where Cinderella would soon appear. In a carriage draped with silver and white flowers, Cinderella made her grand entrance. The crowd hushed in awe as the doors opened, revealing the radiant bride. Her gown shimmered with diamonds, and her face glowed with happiness. Prince Edward's breath caught as he saw her. He extended his hand toward her, and together they ascended the steps of the altar. "I vow to protect you, to cherish you, and to stand by you through all of life's adventures," Prince Edward said solemnly. His voice echoed in the silence, and the vows were exchanged. Cinderella smiled, her heart full of love. "I vow to love you with all my heart, to grow with you, and to share in your joys and sorrows, and no matter where life takes us." The ceremony ended in a flurry of cheers and applause. The newlyweds were led to the grand ballroom, where a lavish feast awaited them. Tables overflowed with delicacies, from honeyed fruits to roasted meats and sweet pastries. The guests danced, laughed, and celebrated long into the night. Cinderella felt her feet leave the ground as Prince Edward twirled her around the dance floor. Her laughter rang through the air, mingling with the music and the joy of the crowd. She glanced up at her new husband, whose eyes shone with adoration. "I thought my life was complete the moment I found you," Prince Edward whispered, holding her close. "But every moment with you is even more magical than the last." Cinderella's heart swelled with happiness. "And so it shall be," she murmured, pressing her cheek against his shoulder. The sun set, and the moon rose high in the sky, casting a silver glow over the palace. Cinderella and Prince Edward sat side by side on a balcony. Overlooking the kingdom, they would rule together. The air was still and peaceful, the night only broken by the soft sounds of crickets and the gentle rustling of leaves. "Tonight," Cinderella said softly, "is the start of forever." But Prince Edward smiled, his hand entwined with hers. "Forever with you, my love." But their love story was more than a tale of royalty. It was a story of two souls destined to find one another, no matter the odds. Together, they promised to weave a future filled with kindness, courage, and dreams fulfilled. And so, their kingdom flourished under their reign, their hearts united in a bond that no distance could break, and no time could undo. The sun rose over the kingdom with a gentle warmth, casting a golden glow across the sprawling castle grounds. Cinderella stood at a window in her chamber, gazing out at the land that stretched beyond the palace walls. Life had changed in ways she had never imagined, yet the sense of wonder never left her heart. Prince Edward entered the room quietly, his eyes full of love and understanding. He approached Cinderella and took her hands in his. "Good morning, my queen," he whispered with a tender smile. "Good morning, my prince," she replied softly, her voice filled with affection. "Every morning is brighter with you by my side." Their love story continued, but even royalty faced challenges. The kingdom was vast, and each day brought new responsibilities, new decisions that needed to be made. Yet, no matter how heavy the weight of ruling, their bond remained unshakable. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting hues of orange and pink across the sky, Cinderella and Prince Edward sat alone in a quiet garden. The scent of blooming roses filled the air, and the gentle rustling of leaves created a serene melody. "This garden was your sanctuary," Prince Edward said, glancing around at the vibrant flowers that surrounded them. "I remember how you used to sit here, lost in thought, and yet still find beauty in every moment. And you still know how to surprise me," Cinderella replied, smiling softly. "This garden will always be my special place, even now." "I hope it remains yours forever," Prince Edward said, squeezing her hand gently. "No matter where life takes us. A life, however, is never without its tests." A neighboring kingdom, ruled by a cunning and ambitious king, sought to expand its territory, and messages arrived at the royal court, filled with threats and demands. Prince Edward's council debated, but he knew that peace was the key. Yet, the heart of the princess remained unwavering. "Peace is the path," Cinderella urged. "We must show them kindness, even if it's not returned." Her words carried weight, and soon, her wisdom began to sway the council's decisions. Together, they chose a peaceful route. The neighboring king, intrigued by the strength of Cinderella's heart, reconsidered his approach. In a gesture of goodwill, an alliance was formed, and the kingdom found harmony once more. As years passed, their love only deepened, but even royalty faced moments of reflection. One evening, as they shared a quiet moment beneath the stars, Prince Edward spoke. "Do you remember that night at the ball?" he asked, his voice laced with nostalgia. "When I first saw you." "I do," Cinderella replied softly, leaning against him. "It feels like a dream, doesn't it?" "It was more than a dream," Prince Edward whispered. "It was destiny, and with you, every moment is a story worth telling." "And it's not just ours," Cinderella said with a gentle smile. "It belongs to the world, to every child who dreams of magic and love, of kindness and courage." Their love became a legacy, a story passed down through generations. Cinderella and Prince Edward ruled their kingdom with grace, and their tale was etched into the hearts of all who heard it. Each night, when the castle doors closed and the kingdom lay beneath a blanket of stars, they danced one last time, alone in the moonlight, a dance of love, a dance of forever. The end of their tale wasn't just the closing of a chapter, but the beginning of a legacy, a story of timeless love, of courage, and of dreams realized. And in the hearts of those who followed, their names would echo through the ages as symbols of hope and wonder. Once upon a time, in a small but bustling village, there lived a young girl named Alara who was known to the townsfolk as Cinderella. Unlike the traditional tale, this Cinderella wasn't merely a maid bound to a cruel stepmother. She was an orphan who had grown up in a humble cottage on the edge of the forest, cared for by the kind-hearted townspeople who treated her as one of their own. Alara's life revolved around helping others. She mended torn clothes for the tailor, carried water for the baker, and sang songs for the children. Her kindness was boundless, and though she had little, she gave much. However, a shadow loomed over her joyful spirit. The Baron, a greedy man who ruled the village, was intent on evicting the townsfolk to expand his grand estate. One crisp morning, Alara sat under the shade of an ancient oak tree, weaving wildflowers into a garland. A soft hum escaped her lips as she worked, her melody blending with the rustling leaves. But suddenly, a carriage rolled by on the cobbled road, its wheels kicking up dust. The carriage bore the royal crest, and Alara's curiosity was piqued. A figure leaned out of the carriage, a young man with sharp eyes and an air of quiet determination. Their eyes met briefly before the carriage disappeared down the road, leaving Alara with a strange sense of anticipation. In the heart of the village square, a proclamation was announced by a royal messenger. The prince himself had decided to tour the kingdom, seeking to understand its people and their struggles. Alara listened intently, her mind swirling with thoughts. If the prince was truly interested in the well-being of the villagers, perhaps he could help stop the Baron's cruel plans. The villagers, however, were skeptical. "Royalty doesn't care about the likes of us," muttered old Sam, the blacksmith. Alara, determined to try, decided she would speak to the prince herself. The next morning, Alara donned her best dress, a simple blue frock she had patched and mended countless times. She made her way to the town hall, where the prince was set to meet with the villagers. The line was long, and many shared their grievances. But when it was Alara's turn, her voice trembled only slightly as she spoke. "Your Highness," she began, bowing deeply. "I am Alara, but most call me Cinderella. Our village is under threat from the Baron, who wishes to take our homes and livelihoods. Please, I beg you, intervene before it's too late." The prince studied her carefully. "Cinderella," he repeated, his voice thoughtful. "Your plea is earnest, and your courage is evident. I will investigate this matter personally." True to his word, the prince visited the village the next day. He spoke with the townsfolk, walked through the forested edges, where the Baron's plans were already taking shape, and observed the fear and despair on the villagers' faces. Alara guided him through the areas most affected, and as they walked, the prince found himself drawn not just to her story, but to her unwavering spirit. By the time the sun set, the prince had seen enough. He called for a meeting with the Baron, determined to confront him. "You will not displace these people," the prince declared firmly. "The land belongs to the crown, and I will not allow your greed to destroy their lives." The Baron's protests fell on deaf ears. For the first time, Alara felt a glimmer of hope. That evening, as the prince prepared to leave, he turned to Alara. "Your bravery has inspired me," he said sincerely. "And you've reminded me of what it means to be a true leader." Alara blushed, but met his gaze. "And you've reminded us that not all royalty is distant or unkind." As the prince's carriage disappeared into the night, Alara stood beneath the same ancient oak tree where she had first glimpsed him. For the first time, she felt that her life might be on the cusp of a new beginning, a tale of kindness, courage, and perhaps something more. Days turned into weeks, and the village buzzed with the news that the Baron's plans had been halted. Ilara's heart soared every time she saw the townsfolk smile again, their worry replaced by cautious hope. Yet, as life settled back into its usual rhythm, a new challenge began to take shape. The prince's intervention had left the Baron furious, and he wasn't one to back down easily. While the royal decree had stopped his immediate actions, whispers spread that the Baron was scheming in secret, determined to reclaim his hold over the land. The villagers, still wary of his power, turned to Ilara for guidance. "We need to be vigilant," Ilara told them during a gathering in the town square. "We may have won this battle, but the Baron won't give up so easily." Old Sam, the blacksmith, nodded grimly. "You're right, lass. We'll need to watch his every move." Meanwhile, in the grand halls of the castle, the prince found himself thinking of Ilara more often than he cared to admit. Her courage, her selflessness, and her unwavering determination had left a lasting impression. He couldn't shake the memory of her standing before him, pleading not for herself, but for the entire village. "I should visit the village again," he told his trusted advisor, Sir Alden. "I want to ensure that the people are safe and that the Baron isn't plotting something in the shadows." Sir Alden raised an eyebrow but nodded. "A wise decision, Your Highness, though I suspect there may be another reason for your visit." The prince didn't reply, but a faint smile tugged at his lips. When the prince arrived in the village unannounced one sunny afternoon, the townsfolk gathered in surprise and delight. Children ran to greet him, their laughter echoing through the air. Ilara, who had been helping the baker knead dough, wiped her hands on her apron and stepped outside, her heart racing at the sight of him. "Your Highness," she said with a bow, a warm smile spreading across her face. "We didn't expect to see you again so soon." "I wanted to check on the village," the prince replied, his gaze softening as it met hers. "And to speak with you. Cinderella, your courage continues to inspire me." Ilara felt her cheeks flush, but she quickly turned her attention to the matter at hand. "The villagers are doing their best to stay vigilant, but the Baron is a cunning man. I fear he may try something drastic. Then we'll be ready." The prince assured her, "You have my word." Over the next few days, the prince worked alongside the villagers, helping them fortify their homes and organize patrols to keep watch over the Baron's estate. Ilara was constantly by his side, offering suggestions and rallying the townsfolk with her boundless energy. One evening, as they rested beneath the ancient oak tree, the prince turned to her. "You've done so much for this village, Cinderella. You've shown a strength and determination that many would envy." "I only do what I can," Ilara replied modestly. "This village is my family, and I would do anything to protect it." The prince smiled. "Your humility is as admirable as your bravery. I've met many nobles and leaders in my time, but none have moved me as you have." Ilara's heart skipped a beat, but she quickly looked away, focusing on the stars that twinkled above. The Baron, however, was far from idle, hidden within the shadows of his grand estate. He had been devising a plan to undermine the prince's authority and regain control of the village. With the help of a few loyal but unscrupulous allies, he began spreading false rumors that the prince's actions were merely a ploy to win favor with the common folk. These rumors reached the village, sowing seeds of doubt among some of the townsfolk. "What if the Baron is right?" whispered one villager. "What if the prince is only using us for his own gain?" Ilara, hearing these murmurs, felt a pang of frustration. The prince has done nothing but help us, she argued passionately. We mustn't let the Baron's lies divide us. But doubt was a powerful force, and Alara knew they needed more than words to unite the village. That night, as the village slept, Alara stayed awake, pacing in her small cottage. She thought about the prince, the villagers, and the Baron's relentless schemes. She realized that the only way to truly protect the village was to expose the Baron's deceit once and for all. The next morning, she sought out the prince and shared her plan. We need to gather evidence of the Baron's schemes, she said. If we can prove his corruption, the villagers will have no reason to doubt your intentions. The prince nodded thoughtfully. You're right, Cinderella. But it's a dangerous task. Are you sure you're willing to take that risk? I'll do whatever it takes to protect my home, she replied firmly. Together, they began devising a strategy, enlisting the help of a few trusted villagers to watch over the Baron's estate. It was a risky endeavor, but Alara's resolve never wavered. As they worked side by side, the bond between Alara and the prince grew stronger. And though the path ahead was fraught with uncertainty, they both knew that their shared determination would see them through. The village grew quiet under the cover of night, with only the occasional chirp of crickets breaking the silence. By the light of a flickering lantern, Alara prepared herself for the dangerous task ahead. Dressed in plain clothes and carrying a small pouch of tools, she met the prince and a few trusted villagers near the edge of the forest that bordered the Baron's estate. This is the night, Alara whispered, her voice steady despite the nervous energy coursing through her. We'll gather the evidence we need to expose him. The prince, dressed in a simple cloak to avoid drawing attention, placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. We're in this together, Cinderella. Let's move quickly and stay safe. With careful steps, the group approached the imposing estate. The Baron's mansion loomed like a dark shadow against the moonlit sky. Let's get started. Its towering walls and iron gates designed to keep prying eyes away. But Alara's determination was stronger than her fear. Using a hidden pathway that the villagers had discovered during their patrols, Alara and the prince slipped through a gap in the estate's outer wall. They crouched low, their breaths shallow as they navigated the sprawling grounds. Inside the mansion, the Baron sat in his grand study, surrounded by maps and documents detailing his schemes. He muttered to himself, a wicked grin spreading across his face as he finalized his latest plan. Unbeknownst to him, Alara and the prince had managed to slip into the servants' quarters, where they found a stack of discarded papers. Alara's eyes widened as she scanned the documents. These are plans to seize control of the village again, she murmured. He's been forging signatures and bribing officials to make it look legitimate. The prince examined the papers and nodded grimly. This is exactly what we need. But we'll need more to convince the royal court. As they carefully made their way deeper into the mansion, they stumbled upon a locked room near the Baron's study. From inside, faint voices could be heard. Alara's heart raced as she realized the Baron might be meeting with his allies at that very moment. The prince motioned for the group to stay quiet. We can't risk being caught, he whispered. But if we can record their conversation somehow, it could be the final piece of evidence we need. Alara glanced at the pouch she had brought. Among the tools was a small, enchanted crystal that the village herbalist had given her. The crystal could store voices, capturing every word spoken near it. Carefully, she placed the crystal near the door and waited. Inside, the Baron's voice rang out, dripping with arrogance. Our time is near, he declared. Once the village is back under my control, no one will dare defy me again. Not even the prince can stand in my way." Another voice, deep and gravelly, replied, "And what of the girl, Cinderella? She's been a thorn in your side for too long." The Baron laughed. "She's nothing more than a nuisance. When the time comes, she'll regret ever crossing me." Elara clenched her fists, anger bubbling within her. But she forced herself to remain calm. They couldn't afford to make a mistake now. With the evidence secured, Elara and the group retreated from the mansion, retracing their steps through the estate grounds. The journey back to the village felt like an eternity, every shadow and rustle of leaves setting their nerves on edge. Finally, they reached the safety of the forest. Elara let out a shaky breath, her heart pounding in her chest. "We did it," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We have everything we need to bring him to justice." The prince nodded, his expression serious. "Tomorrow we'll present this evidence to the royal court. The Baron's reign of terror ends here." The next day, the villagers gathered in the town square, their faces filled with anticipation and hope. Elara and the prince stood before them, holding the papers and the enchanted crystal that would reveal the Baron's treachery. As the crystal replayed the Baron's words for all to hear, gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd. The villagers, once divided by doubt, now stood united in their outrage. "He lied to us." Old Sam growled, his fists clenched. "He thought he could control us, but we won't let him." The prince raised a hand, calling for silence. "The royal court has been informed," he announced. "The Baron will face justice for his crimes. And with your support, we can ensure that this village remains a place of peace and freedom." Cheers erupted from the crowd, their voices echoing across the square. For the first time in years, the villagers felt a sense of true liberation. As the sun set that evening, casting a golden glow over the village, Elara stood by the fountain in the center of the square. The prince approached her, a soft smile on his face. "You've done so much for this village, Cinderella," he said. "Your courage and determination have inspired us all." Elara smiled, her heart full. "I couldn't have done it without the support of the villagers. They're the true heroes of this story." The prince took her hand, his gaze steady. "Perhaps. But you are the one who brought them together, who gave them hope when they needed it most. You are extraordinary, Cinderella." As the villagers celebrated around them, Elara felt a warmth she hadn't known in years. She had found her place in the world, not as a servant or a forgotten soul, but as a beacon of hope and resilience. And though her journey was far from over, she knew that with the prince by her side and the love of her village in her heart, she could face whatever challenges lay ahead. The golden hues of morning filtered through the trees as Elara stood by the fountain, her heart full of newfound hope. The village was alive with joy, a stark contrast to the oppressive silence it had known under the Baron's rule. However, deep within the stone walls of the royal dungeons, the Baron's fury festered. His mind raced with schemes, plotting his escape and thirsting for revenge against the girl who had toppled his reign. "I will not rot here," the Baron growled to himself, his sharp eyes scanning the dimly lit cell. A guard stood just outside, his posture relaxed but his sword within reach. The Baron's thoughts turned to the secret network of allies he had cultivated over the years. Mercenaries, thieves, and disgraced noblemen who thrived on chaos. He was certain that they wouldn't let him languish here for long. Back in the village, Elara felt an unease she couldn't shake. Though justice had prevailed, a shadow lingered in her heart. She stood outside her small cottage, her hands gripping the wooden railing as the wind whispered through the trees. The prince approached her, his brow furrowed with concern. "You seem troubled. Cinderella, he said, his voice gentle. Alara nodded, her gaze fixed on the horizon. The Baron may be imprisoned, but I can't help feeling this isn't over. Men like him don't. Tree, its gnarled roots forming a natural archway. Alara approached cautiously, her heart racing. Beneath the archway lay a small chest, its surface adorned with intricate carvings. She knelt beside it and opened the lid, revealing a shimmering artifact shaped like a crystal orb. The prince's eyes widened. This is the orb of truth. Let's get started. It said to reveal the true nature of those who come into contact with it. If the Baron touches this, his lies and schemes will be exposed to all. Alara's hands trembled as she held the orb. But how do we get him to touch it? The prince's gaze hardened. We'll find a way. For now, we must keep this safe. The Baron must never learn of its existence. The discovery of the orb gave Alara renewed hope. But it also heightened the stakes. The Baron's forces were growing, and the villagers were preparing for the fight of their lives. As night fell over the village, Alara stood at the edge of the forest, the orb clutched tightly in her hands. The path ahead was uncertain, but she knew one thing for sure. She would protect her home and her people, no matter the cost. The air was thick with tension in the days following the discovery of the orb. Alara and the prince worked tirelessly to protect their village, but the shadow of the Baron's growing army loomed ever larger. Each passing moment felt like a countdown to a storm that would either break them or define their legacy. In the quiet of her small cottage, Alara stared at the orb resting on her wooden table. It glowed faintly, its light seeming to pulse in time with her heartbeat. She couldn't shake the feeling that the orb held secrets beyond what they understood, a power far greater than they had dared to imagine. That evening, the prince arrived with news that made her heart sink. "We've received word from our scouts," he said, his tone grave. "The Baron has aligned himself with a dangerous outlaw faction from the eastern forests. Their numbers are growing, and they've begun moving closer to the village." Alara's eyes narrowed. "Then we don't have much time." The prince nodded. "No, we must act swiftly. We need to use the orb, but we have to find a way to ensure the Baron comes into contact with it. If we can expose him for what he truly is, his allies may abandon him, and his power will crumble." Alara hesitated, her mind racing. But how do we lure him in without risking everything? The Baron is cunning. He won't walk into a trap unless he believes he's already won. The prince's expression softened. "We'll figure it out. Together." The villagers, inspired by Alara's bravery and the prince's leadership, had transformed their quiet homes into a fortress of resilience. Barricades lined the edges of the village, and the square buzzed with activity as men and women prepared for the inevitable confrontation. Among them was a young boy named Theo, whose courage outshone his years. He had been one of the first to volunteer for the watchtower duty, standing tall despite his small frame. Alara often found herself marveling at the determination of the villagers, each of them a reminder of why she couldn't afford to fail. As the days passed, rumors of the Baron's next move spread like wildfire. Some said he had planned to burn the village to the ground. Others whispered that he sought revenge against Alara personally. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Alara and the prince called a meeting in the village square. "We've fought too hard to give in to fear," the prince said, his voice carrying over the gathered crowd. "The Baron's strength lies in intimidation, but we are stronger when we stand united." Alara stepped forward, the orb cradled in her hands. Its light bathed her face in a golden glow. "This artifact is our hope," she said. "It has the power to reveal the truth, to expose the Baron for who he really is. But to use it, we'll need to be brave, clever, and willing to take risks. The villagers murmured among themselves, their fear tempered by Ilara's determination. Theo raised his hand, his voice clear despite his trembling hands. "We believe in you, Ilara. We'll do whatever it takes." Ilara's heart swelled with pride. "Thank you, Theo. Thank you all. Together, we will protect our home." That night, as the village settled into an uneasy quiet, Ilara found herself unable to sleep. She wandered to the edge of the forest, the orb tucked securely in her satchel. The moonlight filtered through the trees, casting silvery patterns on the ground. She closed her eyes and let the sounds of the forest envelop her. But her peace was shattered by the snap of a twig behind her. Spinning around, she found herself face to face with a cloaked figure. "Ilara," the figure said, their voice low and urgent. Ilara's hand flew to the satchel, ready to protect the orb at all costs. "Who are you? What do you want?" The figure pulled back their hood to reveal a woman with piercing green eyes and an air of mystery. "My name is Lyra. I was once the Baron's confidant, but I've turned against him. He's more dangerous than you realize." Ilara's suspicion flared. "Why should I trust you?" Lyra held up her hands in a gesture of peace. "Because I know his plans. He intends to attack the village at dawn, but he has a weakness, a secret he's desperate to keep hidden. The orb can do more than reveal his lies. It can destroy the source of his power." Ilara's eyes widened. "What power?" "The Baron's strength doesn't come from strategy alone," Lyra explained. "He possesses a cursed amulet that grants him unnatural influence over others. Without it, his army would crumble." The revelation left Ilara reeling. She hurried back to the village with Lyra, her mind racing with possibilities. By the time the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, the villagers were ready. They had fortified their defenses, but their true weapon was the plan Ilara and Lyra had devised overnight. The prince approached Ilara as the villagers gathered. "Are you sure about this?" he asked, his voice tinged with concern. Ilara nodded. "If we can destroy the amulet, the Baron will lose his grip on his forces. It's our best chance." The prince's gaze softened. "Then let's end this." As the Baron's army approached, the villagers stood their ground. Ilara and the prince positioned themselves at the heart of the village, the orb glowing brightly between them. The battle began with a thunderous clash as the Baron's forces stormed the barricades. The villagers fought with courage and unity, their resolve unshaken even as the odds seemed stacked against them. Ilara's heart pounded as she spotted the Baron at the edge of the battlefield. His presence was as commanding as ever, but she noticed something new, a glint of desperation in his eyes. She raised the orb high, its light cutting through the chaos. "Baron," she shouted, her voice ringing out across the battlefield. "Face me if you dare." The Baron's gaze snapped to her, and for a moment the battle seemed to pause. With a sneer, he began to advance toward her, his hand clutching the cursed amulet that hung around his neck. Ilara's grip tightened on the orb. The moment of truth had arrived. The air seemed to still as the Baron stepped forward, his dark cloak billowing around him like storm clouds. The cursed amulet around his neck glinted menacingly in the light of the orb, and his eyes narrowed as he studied Ilara. "You think that trinket will save you?" he sneered, his voice a low growl. "You are nothing without your magic, just as you were nothing before I cast you out." Ilara stood her ground, her heart pounding in her chest. She could feel the weight of every villager's hope resting on her shoulders, but she refused to let the fear take hold. "You rely on fear and lies," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "But the truth will always shine brighter than darkness." The Baron laughed, a harsh and mocking sound that echoed across the battlefield. "Then let us see whose light burns stronger," he said, raising his hand. The amulet glowed with an eerie, pulsating light, and a wave of dark energy swept toward her. Elara braced herself, holding the orb aloft. The golden light expanded, meeting the darkness head on. The two forces collided in a dazzling display of power, sparks flying as they fought for dominance. The prince appeared at her side, his sword drawn and his expression fierce. "You're not alone, Elara," he said. The villagers rallied around them, their courage unshaken by the display of dark magic. They fought with everything they had, holding the Baron's forces at bay as Elara and the prince faced him directly. The orb's light began to intensify, its glow now so bright that it illuminated the entire battlefield. Elara felt a surge of energy coursing through her, as if the orb were drawing strength from her determination and the unity of the villagers. But the Baron was relentless. He pushed forward, his dark magic clawing at the edges of the light. "You cannot defeat me," he roared. "I am power incarnate." Elara's mind raced as she realized the orb alone might not be enough. The Baron's amulet seemed to absorb the energy, growing stronger with every attack. She needed a way to break its hold over him, but how? Suddenly, she remembered Lyra's words. The amulet grants him influence, but it cannot withstand pure, unselfish love. She turned to the prince. "The villagers need to see the truth," she said. "We have to show them what we're fighting for. Not just against him, but for each other." The prince nodded, his eyes filled with resolve. "Then let's give them hope." He stepped forward, raising his voice above the chaos. "Villagers, look around you," he shouted. "This is our home, our family, our future. We fight not for power, but for love, for the bonds that tie us together. Stand strong, and let your courage light the way." The villagers responded with a deafening roar of approval. Their unity seemed to ripple through the battlefield, a wave of strength that bolstered their defenses and drove the Baron's forces back. Elara focused all her energy on the orb, willing it to reveal the truth hidden within the Baron's heart. The light grew brighter, pulsing in time with her racing heartbeat. The Baron staggered, his sneer faltering for the first time. The amulet around his neck began to crack, dark energy seeping from its surface. "No," he hissed, clutching the amulet as if his life depended on it. "This cannot be." Elara stepped closer, her voice calm but resolute. "Your power was built on lies and fear, but the truth cannot be silenced. It will always find a way to shine." With a final surge of light, the orb released its energy, engulfing the Baron in a golden glow. The villagers watched in awe as the dark aura around him dissipated, leaving behind a man stripped of his power and his pride. The battle was over. The Baron's forces, seeing their leader defeated, scattered into the woods. The villagers erupted into cheers, their joy echoing through the valley. Elara and the prince stood side by side, their hearts heavy with relief and gratitude. The orb, now dim and lifeless, rested in Elara's hands. "You did it," the prince said, his voice filled with admiration. "You saved us all." Elara shook her head, a soft smile on her lips. "We did it. Together." As dawn broke over the village, the people gathered in the square to celebrate their victory. They shared stories of bravery, laughter, and love, their spirits unbroken despite the trials they had faced. Elara looked out over the crowd, her heart swelling with pride. She had found her place among these people, a family she had never expected but now couldn't imagine living without. The prince approached her, a thoughtful expression on his face. "What will you do now, Elara?" he asked. She smiled, her eyes shining with determination. "I'll stay and help rebuild. This is my home now, and I want to make sure it's a place where kindness and courage always prevail." The prince nodded, his own smile matching hers. "Then we'll rebuild together." The village flourished in the months that followed, its people stronger and more united than ever. The Baron's defeat became the stuff of legend, a story passed down through generations as a testament to the power of truth and love. And as for Alara, she found her happily ever after, not in a castle or a crown, but in the hearts of the people she had come to call her family.